All right, good evening, everybody. David Paul with you in the KHOU 11 Weather Center. How are you doing on this Thursday evening? This is our update on Dorian for the evening. And Dorian, if you haven't heard during the day today, hasn't done a lot of strengthening. It's still a Category 1 hurricane. There's Dorian right here, just to set your bearings. There's Florida. Here's the Gulf of Mexico, which is quiet. There's Houston. But Dorian is expected to rapidly intensify as we get into tomorrow. In fact, by tomorrow afternoon, Dorian is expected to become a major hurricane, Cat 3. And then perhaps go on to Cat 4 category strength before making landfall. We still think somewhere on the Florida coast, somewhere on the Florida coast. That's the tough part. It hasn't really been nailed down yet exactly where that eye is going to cross. That's the spot that has all those strong Category 4 winds in it. Over the past 6 hours, Dorian has continued to move just about due north-northwest at about 13 miles an hour. We do not see, at the moment, we do not see an eye opening up yet in Dorian. But I expect we will see a visible eye open up near the center of the storm as we head into tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon. As it strengthens, that eye tends to open up. We call that eye. When the eye opens, when it opens its eyes, it really begins to get become a dangerous storm situation. And I found this very interesting, and we were talking about this on my Facebook page a little bit ago. I wanted to share this with you. So think about a time back in the not too distant past, let's say the 1940s, the 1950s, eras before we had satellites, before we could look down on planet Earth from 22,500 miles in outer space and take pictures and see where these things are going. And before we had such sophisticated computer models, we relied on persistence forecasting. And this storm has been very persistent in its track. You can see all the individual plots we've had. And back in the day, these were all done by ships, which would be passing out here, sailing through, and they would take a fix on the center of the storm. And it's been moving very steadily, made that nice turn to the northwest now, and quite often the traditional path for a hurricane in this part of the Atlantic is for it to continue on that northwest track and then head north as it rotates around the Bermuda High that sets up out here. There's the island of Bermuda, why we call this the Bermuda High. But that is not what's going to happen with this storm track at all. That Bermuda High is going to move to the west, and that high pressure area is literally going to block the path of Dorian from moving north, and it's going to shove it off to the west. And that's why it's going to be moving toward Florida and why the East Coast is under such a threat from this. And here are the computer models, and what's happening again is that high pressure dome right up here is just acting like a blocker in football. It just won't let that storm come up. It's pushing it down and blocking it off to the west. All the computer models very in a tight consensus, making landfall somewhere on the Florida coast, and then almost all of them then curve it in some manner back off to the north. This outlier, the tabs, is one that we are discounting because it is such an outlier. It's more likely that it will make that northerly turn. So we're not overly worried about a storm drifting into the Gulf, not this one anyway. However, as the storm approaches the coast and moves inland, it's forecast to slow down. And in fact, we've had to slow our timeline down by a full 24 hours. Let's take a look at the forecast track from the actual Hurricane Center. So yesterday at this time, we felt like the storm would make landfall Sunday. Now it looks like it's going to make landfall, this is Monday afternoon. So it's going to be Monday afternoon, Monday evening, somewhere up and down the east coast of Florida is going to get hit by a Category 4 hurricane. Winds sustained at 130 is the forecast. They may end up being stronger than that. They'll be stronger gusts. Hurricanes that are Cat 4 can have wind gusts to 180, and that clearly can be devastating to any buildings or anything on the coast where that center makes landfall. Now, the center of the storm, that eye wall right around the center, that's where those strongest winds are and will be. The further you get away from the center of the storm, the weaker the winds get, but clearly this can still have a wide area where you have winds that are capable of doing significant damage, especially on the dirty side, on the right-hand side of storm to motion. That'll be wherever the storm passes and north of the storm will get the dirty side. At last check, if you're using your tracking chart, we're 22.5 north and 67.7 west. That's where the storm is right now as it's exited the Caribbean and now over the open Atlantic Ocean. So Category 4, here's your Saffir-Simpson scale. Category 1, 74 to 95. Cat 2, 96 to 110. Ike had Cat 2 winds in 2008 in Houston, but it had a Cat 4 surge. That was the one where we realized we had to separate wind forecast from surge forecast. They can be two very different things. Cat 3, Alicia, Houston in 1983. If you remember that, that was my first hurricane experience. I was a teenager. Scared me and fascinated me, and one of the big reasons I'm now a meteorologist. Category 4, so that's what we're looking at here with Dorian, 130 to 156 mile an hour winds. So what does that look like? Wind damage. This is not surge damage, this is just the wind damage. Well, we know what that looks like because Hurricane Harvey in 2017 was Category 4 when it made landfall near Corpus Christi. Rockport was in the northern eye wall. They took the worst of it. And so this is not storm surge damage. Remember, surge is when the water comes in. That can completely wash away homes. This is just wind damage, and you can see the significant roof and wall damage that the south-facing portions of these homes took. I think they got real lucky with this roof. Now remember, construction codes have changed since the late 80s and early 90s. We now require roofs along the coast to use what are called hurricane clips to hold the roof down to the frame. And I think that's making a big difference because I've seen a lot of Category 4 wind damage pics where the roofs are completely blown off. That was probably better construction codes, but that's bad, and trees knocked down and power out for weeks, if not months, from a Category 4 hurricane. That's Harvey in 2017. That was the wind part. Houston, we missed the wind part of Harvey in 2017. We just got the rain part as we were on the wet side of that storm. Worst flood in U.S. history. So what's steering the storm? Let's take a look at the steering currents. These are the winds at 18,000 feet. This was earlier this afternoon, storm located here. There's a little trough of low pressure out here, an upper level low spinning counterclockwise. That's really having minimal effect on the storm. It's actually been putting a little wind shear across it at upper levels, but it hasn't really done much to steer it. In theory, a little upper level low spinning out here to the west of a storm would pull it toward it. The storm would want to get into that flow and kind of wrap around it, and it may be what's helping pull a little bit west of north right now, but that little low out there is not the big player. The big player is this ridge of high pressure we talked about to the north, and you can see it. Again, here's Dorian, and here is our sprawling ridge of high pressure spinning clockwise. There's your high. So that's a mountain of air. So Dorian wants to turn north because of the Coriolis force, but it can't. That high pressure dome is just literally sitting there and just blocking the storm. It cannot move north. It's going to be pushed off to the west, and that's why it's going to make that turn. Isn't it nice to have computer models to help us guide these things, or at least know where they're going in general? Okay, so here's what's happened. I'll put this in motion. Watch the ridge of high pressure. It's going to move west. Dorian is going to move west, and that ridge, we'll put this in motion. I'll leave the arrows up there, see if this works. Yeah, it just blocks it and pushes the storm to the west. And the ridge of high pressure actually expands. It elongates over the eastern, southeast portion of the United States. Now, eventually, what we think is going to happen is the western edge of that ridge is going to weaken. And that is what we think will eventually allow the storm to turn to the north. In fact, you can see a little weakness right there. There's a little trough right there, another ridge building out to the west. But we think that little bit of weakness in here will allow an escape route for it to turn north. But it's going to also slow down the storm. And so there is also going to be a significant flood threat in Florida, Georgia, South North Carolina. They may have 15, 20, 25, 30 inches of rain or more in some spots if that storm does slow down significantly. All right, so there are the nuts and bolts of Hurricane Dorian as it stands right now. On the 10 o'clock news tonight, on the TV side, we'll have everything updated. We'll talk more about the storm and our own forecast in Houston. Real quickly, we're looking at more summertime. 20% chance for a scattered shower through the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Labor Day, Monday. mid-90s, 20% rain chance, typical summertime stuff. Everything updated on the TV side at 10 o'clock. Join us there for the show.